Yes, we can. I can.
Great. Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Cindy Davis. I'll be chairing this session this morning. And I'd just like to quickly take a roll call and let you know that we will be missing today board members Hart and board member Cannon, and Chair Hansen will be joining us shortly, perhaps in an hour or so.
Chair Huntsman.
Chair Huntsman, yes. Is that what I said?
No, you said Chair Hansen.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And
always
Chair,
mix those two.
Chair, we don't have a quorum yet.
Oh, I was about to take roll. Okay.
I only see 6 so far. So we actually probably can't start until we have a quorum.
You're right. We have to wait. Okay.
So everybody go get whatever liquid you need for the day, whether it's Diet Coke or water. Vice Chair Davis, we have a quorum now.
Okay. I'll go ahead and take roll and we can get started. Vice Chair Belknap.
Hello.
Member Booth.
Good morning.
Member Cline.
Good morning.
Member Earl.
Yes.
Member Hansen.
Good morning.
Member Hutchings.
I'm here.
Member Hymas.
Here.
Member Lear. Board member Moss just texted and said he would be joining in a few minutes. He's dealing with an emergency. Board member Norton.
Here.
Board member Straight.
Here.
All right, good morning. That's nice energy for 9 a.m. We'll go ahead and get started. As authorized by Utah Code 52-4, this meeting is being held electronically without an anchor location for safety reasons due to the construction at the location where the public body would normally meet. Sybil just sent a text to all of our board members also, reminding them that we are starting now. So I think we're going to go ahead and begin. We have our public comment was requested to come in writing this time. And public, if you're listening currently and you'd like to still contribute, those comments were sent to or can be sent to publiccomments@schools.utah.gov. We are starting our agenda off talking about the model policy for libraries, and we have an action item. I am going to start by addressing the tabled motion from the June 30th board meeting. The tabled motion was that the board amend lines 129 through 133 as follows. In deciding whether the material constitutes sensitive material, the committee must consider as pornographic or indecent materials any material defined as harmful to minors in section 76-10-1201, described as pornographic in 76-10-1203, or described in 76-10-1227. That is the motion that we are currently working on. And I'm going to go ahead and go to board member Earl. Before I pull that motion off the table and go to board member Earl, I'm just going to ask quickly, we have two logistical changes that need to be made to the document. One, board member Booth had noticed that in the section that refers specifically to the school portion of the process, in parentheses, it says LEA name. Without objection from the board, we would add school or LEA name. Is there any objection from the board if we make that logistical change without moving through a long process? Seeing none, another note was made that in the appeal section of the proposed model policy, there's a 20-day limit, and it was suggested that in order for that to potentially be able to go through a committee and or if it needs to go through full board, that the language reflect more of what the process could look like at the local level, which would be a suggested 30 days to get through committee, up to 60 days to get through full board, if that's the direction we go in the board rule. Without objection, or is there objection to changing that 20 days to mirror the 60 days at the local level? Seeing none, I'll just expect that those will be changed in the draft. Board member Cline, do you have objection?
No, I just had another correction. Last month, we struck the S on letters and it's not stricken in the latest version that we got. So I just need to, where it refers to the letters provided by the Attorney General's office dated June 1st, it references just the one, but it still has the S on letters. So that's line 130.
Okay, is there objection to that editing correction? Vice Chair Belknap?
I'm looking for clarity here. Are we not including both AAG's letters in here, but reversing the order?
We are including both and reversing the order as voted on by the board. But I think the reference was to the one letter, and then in the letter, it references the second letter, which will be included in the appendix.
Thank you, Chair, for that clarity.
Correct. There's also one more error on line 68 where it says LEA's name proved a least restrictive. I think it's supposed to be approved or approves instead of prove.
Okay, I'm not sure what that one is, but with your without objection, board member Cline, we'll have staff go and edit that and make sure grammatically that matches, if that's okay with you. And then we'll go ahead and pull the motion off the table. Board member Earl, would you like to quickly remind us what you had said about this motion?
Yes, just quite simply, it just aligns better with the with our AG as well, with the AG letter as well as the law itself, that it could be any of those items. So the way it's written currently in the red is that it has to take into consideration all and are in there. And so this just creates greater clarity, matching up with both the law and the AG's letter.
Okay, thank you. I think we did have some discussion in the last meeting. Is there someone who would like to discuss? Board member Vice Chair Belknap, and then member Hymas.
So I struggle with this one. I appreciate the idea of this, but But if we're not going to list absolutely everything that is listed about pornographic, indecent, or sensitive materials, then we are may be missing something that they should reference. So I'm probably not, this is not clear, this whole section I have a problem with.
Okay, Board Member Hymas.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe Board Member Earl can answer this for me. I'm wondering why we wouldn't want to consider all elements of the 3 codes. We're trying to keep this, part of the intent on writing this long document was to keep it as short as possible, yet still covering everything. And so I thought that as written, it was covered, and maybe I could get a little more clarity as to why the or is important compared to the and, which would include all 3, or are we looking at each one individually? Is there a conflict in these that I missed somewhere?
I think for me, I think it creates less confusion in that it's not saying, you're right, they won't need to consider these pieces of law, but in making their decision, it's an or, it can be any of those. It doesn't have to be all of those. So that's the intent. It's not to create more confusion, but it's to actually create less, that it could be any one of those. The way it's currently written, it looks like it has to incorporate all of those. Anyways, I don't know if maybe there's a better way to write that. Maybe this still creates that confusion. But I think in my mind, it addresses the issue at hand when it comes to sensitive materials.
Board Member Hanson, do you have a follow-up? Board Member Hymas, do you have a follow-up?
Yes,
Sorry.
and I wondered if this would be directed towards staff. Is there, if I'm an LEA and I'm looking at this, is there a problem or a liability with saying, well, I focused on, for example, I focused on 7610-1201 because that fit my needs better than 1203. Is there a concern in there? Does that make sense? Can maybe staff or if a board member knows, I don't know. I'm genuinely trying to understand why we wouldn't take all of the elements and do our best with all that's out there.
Director Van Holten, did you have your hand up?
Yes, and thank you for that. Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for the State Board. In the second AG letter that came out, they kind of walk through the different spectrums of risk that each of these have. And that's really what the LEA has to decide on what they're going to do. So 1201 and 1203 have a lot more case law, they've been tested in the court system more than 1227 has. So that's essentially what the letter is saying. You've got 1201 and 1203 have a lot more history within the court. So you know where your legal risk is likely to lie with those 2 tests. With 1227, it hasn't really been tested in the court system. And so it just really depends on the amount of legal risk you want to take as an LEA, because that one hasn't necessarily been vetted as much through the court process, but all of them are options. And the AG letter does specify in 1227, there's some things you can do in addition to what is listed in 1227 to shore up the legal liability to make it more like a 1201 or a 1203 process, but you have each of those 3 as an option. It just really depends on where you want to sit as an LEA with the legal risk.
So my understanding, you're saying that that these are options for focus, but LEAs are beholden to all laws.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Board Member Cline.
Never mind.
Okay.
I will speak in favor of Jennie's motion though.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other hands, we have a motion on the floor. In deciding whether the material constitutes sensitive material, the committee must consider as pornographic or indecent materials any material defined as harmful to minors in section 7610-1201, described as pornographic in section 76-10-1203 or described in section 76-10-1227. Please vote. Sybil?
If it's not unanimous, you have to do a.
That's what I was just going to
Yes.
ask. So
Yes,
let me go ahead and, I'm guessing we're gonna have to do a roll call for each of these votes. So let's go ahead and start. Vice Chair Belknap,
No,
Vice Chair Booth. I mean, you're Vice Chair of Law and Licensing, but Board Member Booth. Did we lose Randy?
He is a yes.
Yes.
Okay. And Janet Cannon is not here. Board Member Cline.
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Earl,
Yes.
Board Member Hanson,
No.
Board Member Hutchings,
Yes.
Board Member Hymas,
I'm sorry, I hear you. I hear you.
are you a yes or a no?
That's a
member.
great question. I'm going to say no.
Board Member Lear,
she hasn't logged in yet.
Board Member Moss also has not. Board Member Norton,
No.
Board Member Straight,
No.
this motion fails. Board Member Hanson,
I'm sorry. Are you ready for a motion then?
yes, if you, Chair Huntsman had written down that Board Member Earl, Board Member Hanson, and Board Member Cline all had motions, and I believe Board Member Lear has motions as well. So we'll continue to rotate through.
Okay. All right.
But before you start, Board Member Earl,
So are we just going back and forth with the different motions? How are we working?
yeah,
that?
we'll just keep giving everyone a turn. We'll just keep giving everyone a turn. Okay,
Vice Chair, point of order.
yes,
So they can either do one motion or they can conglomerate them and do them all at once. Would that be?
yeah, or they could combine like 3 and make that into one motion. It's
Into
up
one
to them.
motion. Okay, and Chair, if you wouldn't mind, will you tell us where we are now on the table? What's now, where are we? We're back to the amended motion. Is that accurate?
We are, we had a substitute motion on the floor, which was to adopt the master merged policy. And I believe we've already passed last meeting. Did we already pass some amendments?
I just want to make sure we're all on the same page where we are right this minute.
Yeah.
Here.
Sybil, are you here? Did we amend this policy last meeting, or were we right in the middle of the first amendment? Had we passed some amendments?
Member Earl's motion, I believe, was the second amendment. So I believe now you would be starting over. So you passed that first master draft. And Angie and Jeff, please correct me. We had 2 motions. Now you just passed that motion. So now you're starting over with a new amendment.
Okay, and just for clarification,
Motion to amend.
we didn't pass the draft as amended necessarily, but we took that as a substitute motion, which will have to come back to the full body after all of the amendments, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct, Vice Chair Davis. A substitute motion passed to start with the master merged, and there is now a master merged version with the date of June 30th that does include a couple of amendments that the board did approve during the June 30th meeting. And so we're working off of that master merge draft June 30th and moving forward. It did not pass, though, the whole board. You are correct. That will happen after all of the amendments, I'm guessing.
Thank you. And Deputy Superintendent Stallings, can you just clarify for us and for the public, since we have a limited number of board members, even though we have a quorum, what number would it take to constitute passing an amendment?
It's still 8.
It is, yes. So there's a section of code where the State Board of Education is a little different than other bodies, where it's not a simple majority of those who are present, but an action of the board can only occur once you have 8 votes. So if you only have 10 members, for example, you would still need 8 votes in favor or 8 votes against, depending on what the motion is, in order for that motion or document to pass.
Thank you. That was my understanding. I just wanted to make sure that, just for clarity, I was second guessing myself a bit. Okay, I've called on Board Member Hanson, but I think there might be follow-up questions from Board Member Earl and Board Member Straight. Board Member Earl, do you have a follow-up question?
No, I was just wondering the order, if we were going back and forth, and if so, that's fine. So I just didn't know if I need to get into the queue or how that worked, so.
Yeah, I think those are those people who have submitted amendments. So if someone didn't submit early on, they would need to get into the queue. Board Member Straight?
Yes. When I look at the amendments, it seems like there's really interwoven and with one section or one idea. So to go back and forth, to me, seems that we revisit the same idea over and over. Anyway, that's my thought. I'll do it any way you want. You're the chair, so we'll go from there.
Okay, if board members, just to repeat again, would like to combine their motions, if they are of a similar vein, into one motion, they can do that when they make the motion on the floor, to your point, Board Member Straight. Board Member Cline?
Yes, I submitted one last month right after our last meeting as requested, and I didn't see it get attached to the agenda. So just want to make sure I get that in there. And if they don't have it pulled up, that they can go back and find it.
I did see it in Civic Clerk, so I think you are in the list.
Okay.
In the order that they came in. Board Member Hanson?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll start with the motion that I submitted by email earlier this morning, and I apologize for the lateness of this. But the motion, if maybe Director Van Holten can pull that up.
Kelsey's actually the one driving today. It's motion number 9, Kelsey.
Sorry, Kelsey, have you got that? It's number 9 on the list. And just reading through the motion is that we remove the word sensitive from the lines that are listed. We add materials review rubric on line 5. We add or based on age appropriate content to line 19. Revise line 77 to read materials review may be based on 53G 10103 or upon concerns with age appropriateness of content, and revise line 137 to read to add the words or content and read as shown in those parentheses. That's my motion.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to it?
I don't know if we need a second. I'll be happy to speak.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Board Member Straight, second. Board Member Hanson.
Okay, as I've read through the master model policy several times, as I know all of the other board members here have done, I noticed a couple of things. One, I think that the document is inconsistent in that it, in the beginning, restricts. We look at line 77, it says that the review should be restricted just to sensitive materials. But then on lines 137 through 144, it has provisions for the committee, the review committee, to look at things like vulgarity and violence and the age appropriateness of that content. It's my opinion that if we're going to do a library materials review process and have that process in place for parents, that they should be able to raise the issue of age appropriateness as well as pornography, which has been the focus, I think, of the sensitive materials legislation that's gone into place. So parents would be able to raise, under these amendments, parents would be able to raise issues of, for example, graphic violence, age appropriateness for young kids. Something may be appropriate for a high school setting, but not appropriate for younger kids. In some of our schools, we have all the kids lumped into one school using one library, and then allow the committee to deal with that and segregate things by age, depending on using the processes set in place, but depending on the content, they could segregate things for appropriate ages. Anyway, that's my comment. I think that these changes, fairly simple and straightforward changes, will make the document coherent and make it more robust to be used practically, because I think these kind of concerns will be raised by parents. And otherwise, if this model policy doesn't have a method to address that, our LEAs would need to have a separate policy that's for non-sensitive materials, material review, which doesn't make sense to me. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no hands. Oh, sorry, Board Member Earl.
Board Member Straight, then Earl.
All right, thank you. I like the concept.
Sorry, Board Member Straight. I had actually called on Board Member Earl. Sorry, but we'll put you in right after. Thanks.
Sorry, I will update my name. Maybe that's why there's some problems there with the 01. I just want to, as I look through this real quick this morning, I don't think it takes away from the intent. I looked down through the language exactly where it matched up to see if it pulled anything from the concerns with sensitive materials. And in my quick view, unless I've missed something, I feel like this is a very thoughtful direction to go, because I do think that some of the concerns are broader than just the law around sensitive materials. And it allows for the districts and local schools to have that dialogue about other appropriateness. So I do appreciate the thoughtfulness in this particular amendment.
Thank you, Board Member Straight.
He took his hand down.
Okay. There's a motion on the table that the board make the following edits through the model policy. 1, remove the word sensitive from lines 5, 67, 71, 81, 112, 181, 232, and 242. 2, add materials review rubric to line 5. 3, add or based on age appropriate content to line 19. 4, revise line 77 to read materials review may be based on 53G-10-103 or upon concerns with age appropriateness of content. 5, revise line 137 to read vulgarity, violence, or content. The committee ellipsis. Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes.
Board Member Booth?
Yes.
Board Member Cline?
Abstain.
Board Member Earl?
Yes.
Board Member Hanson?
Yes.
Board Member Hutchings?
Yes.
Board Member Hymas?
Yes.
Board Member Lear?
Yes.
Did Board Member Moss ever join us?
I haven't seen him.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Norton?
Yes.
And Member Straight?
Yes.
This motion passes. Board Member Lear, you had submitted amendments. Did we already pass those, that amended language to the appeal? Is that what you had submitted, and did we pass that last meeting? Carol, can you hear me?
Cindy, it's yes, I thought that it was actually language primarily from Jim Moss, and I thought we passed it. We voted on it and passed it last meeting, I thought.
So did you have anything else you had to bring up in this meeting?
I did not, no.
Thank you. Board Member Cline?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
We're ready for your motion.
Oh, okay. Is it pulled up? All right. So my motion is that the board strike lines 85 through 88 and replace those lines with student access to all copies of the material that is subject to a review request shall be withheld in all schools within the LEA until resolution of the complaint process, at which point the material is either retained or removed from the schools in the LEA. And then strike the part in red and put student access to all copies of the material that is subject to a review request shall be withheld in all schools within the LEA until resolution of the complaint process, at which point the material is either retained or removed from all schools in the LEA.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion? Oh, let's see if we have a second first. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Board Member Earl is second. Board Member Cline, would you like to speak?
Well, according to the Attorney General's official memorandum, it requires that when a complaint is made, that access is removed immediately, not after the process is done, but immediately. And so I feel like this amendment is more in line with that recommendation from the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, maybe Board Member Cline could speak or someone else could speak to because I guess if we take this on, we have retained, removed, but we also have restricted built into our current policy that we have. So there'd have to be other amendments associated with. So maybe someone could speak to, I don't know if that's Board Member Cline or anyone else that has knowledge of what the restricted might look like, as we don't have that spelled out. And that is a question I had in one of my amendments as well. So I don't know if anybody has further information, but.
Cindy, I can't raise my hand because I'm driving, but
Okay.
I would like to speak to that if nobody else's hand is up.
I have one other hand and then I will come back to you. But first, let's talk with the question is, how would the rest of the document be amended? And what that would look like. So I don't see a hand currently. So let's go to Board Member Norton. And then we'll come back to Board Member Cline.
I just had a question. So basically what we're doing here is we're eliminating the parents' rights to be able to have their child use that book while it's undergoing this process. Is that correct? Parents cannot give access for their child to use that book.
Board Member Cline, can you answer?
So right now, the way this is written, we are actually giving kids access to pornography in a restricted fashion, either by parental permission or by a digital access code, which goes again, it violates HB 374. And so our schools aren't allowed to give students access to alcohol or drugs, even with parental permission. And so accordingly, the AG's office has asked that those complaint items be removed immediately when a complaint is made. And so I would say that in order to be consistent, we would need to also strike the lines that talk about the restricted option. It's important that we protect kids. It's not like books aren't like people where it's not innocent until proven guilty. It's we have to prove that they're safe before they're put back on the shelves.
Follow-up question, Board Member Norton.
Yeah, follow-up question. And I have to respectfully disagree with that, because at this point, you know, we're basing that on another person's opinion as to whether or not, you know, this book should be or should not be. It has not gone through the process. But I am concerned that if I, as a parent, wanted my child to have that, it's been pulled off of the shelf for access to the students, you know, but, and I don't read that in the, you know, the AAGs that they said that it could not be in a restricted spot, but that, you know, if I, as a parent, felt like my child needed to read that, or I wanted my child to read that, or whatever the case, that, you know, that before we've gone through the process, that I, as a parent, could not go in and check that out. So that's where I have a concern about this, that, you know, we are using one other person's opinion to restrict it from the whole school, especially when it is a parent that is requesting it. So that was just my follow-up.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Board Member Hanson, and then Carol, Board Member Lear, then Board Member Straight, and then Director Van Holten.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm speak against this motion. I think that we're in a situation where we have a lot of parents who have the first responsibility for the education of their child. Those parents don't all agree on what content is acceptable for their children based on kids' maturity levels, based on religion, based on political ideologies, based on many different reasons, which really aren't as important as the fact that the parents don't think that those books are appropriate for their kids. Given that situation, I think that this idea of a restricted area is one of the best tools that we have in this model policy, that it allows us to remove the book while it's under question from circulation from the general population, and allow parents to take on that parental responsibility and decide after a review of the materials whether that's appropriate for their kids. This review process, if many books are challenged, could get bogged down, and books could effectively be removed under this proposed amendment. Books could be removed for months if the review process ends up getting bogged down and taking that long. And effectively, that's just a ban of a book based on one person's accusation, which doesn't seem right to me. I think that, again, the idea of this restricted area is really an awesome feature that's been built into this policy, allows parents to do their job, protects kids. It's just something that we shouldn't be challenging and getting rid of. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Lear.
Thank you. Similar to Scott's comments, first of all, I think it's an inexact statement to say that materials are not like people, innocent till proven guilty. That the very concept of prior restraint is exactly that legal concept, where you cannot restrain things without a determination of it being either wrong for the circumstances or in violation of some statute. So that's the very notion and essence of prior restraint. And so I think that's a misstatement. I also think that was it is not accurate to say the Attorney General's opinion said they must be removed immediately. Aside from the fact that that's advice and an opinion, I don't believe that's accurate. Rather, that it was some information about how they could be restricted. I also believe in local control and believe that we should not be telling LEAs. I agree that this is a rather elegant piece of the policy where it allows certain parents, maybe AP students, maybe certain age levels of students, maybe students whose parents specifically choose to access these materials. And it's the absolute right way to go. And to make it a black and white yes or no is unnecessary in this circumstance. So thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Straight.
Yes, I don't want to repeat what members Norton, Hanson, and Lear said, other than I agree with all those points. I'd like to bring up one other point. This statement does not acknowledge that there are different levels of age appropriateness at different levels of K through 12. And it says here that shall be withheld in all schools. And so that alone does not acknowledge that there's varying degrees of age appropriateness. Thank you. Oh, and I call the question.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to call the question. Those in favor, or we have to take a roll call vote again. Vice Chair Belknap to call the question.
No, I'd like to hear from our AAG.
Okay, Board Member Booth,
No.
Member Cline,
No.
Member Earl,
No.
Member Hanson,
Yes.
Member Hutchings,
No.
Member Hymas,
No.
Member Lear,
Yes.
Member Moss, welcome.
Thank you. No.
Member Norton,
Yes.
Member Straight, Member Straight.
Yes, but glad to listen further.
Okay. This motion fails. Let's move to Director Van Holten and then to AAG Quisenberry and then to Board Member Klein.
I'm actually going to just defer to AAG Quisenberry.
Okay.
Hi, this is Assistant Attorney General Brian Quessenberry, and I just want to clarify that Member Lear is correct. The official memo from the AG's office, it does not state that upon complaint, a book needs to be immediately removed. I've reviewed that memo many times, and I'm fairly confident it does not. It's not that precise and that exact on the timing of when a book should be removed. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Klein.
Sorry, I will try and find that reference in there. But in the meantime, just to address a couple of the other statements that were made, there's always been a different standard, a stricter standard for children when it comes to sensitive materials. It's not the prior restraint argument. We can't possibly bring everything into our schools. So some things are going to necessarily be left out. That there are things being left out, and that is being decided by a school official or a librarian or an educator of some sort. And so they are the ones that are being allowed to determine what is appropriate and what's not. And so when we talk about age appropriateness, according to who? Is this according to parents or according to a trained librarian, a licensed librarian, which gives me pause considering we've had the library associations come to Utah just this year and train our librarians in activism, where they literally, and I could play a sound clip for you from it, where they're all chanting, "We are social justice warriors," and they are literally trying to bring this material in. Not all librarians, obviously, but they are being trained to do this. Just not all of them will. But when we talk about age appropriateness, we've got the American Library Association that is saying that children have a First Amendment right to access all content and that there shouldn't be any discrimination based on age. So to just say age appropriate, I would ask according to who. And also the master draft talks about parental permission, not that a parent goes in to check it out, but the parent gives permission to their student to check it out. And it doesn't say that they have to review it first either, as well as the digital access code that this master merge draft allows. we know how prolific things are shared digitally. How are we going to stop a child from sharing that access to foreign code with other students?
Thank you. Board Member Belknap?
I'll lower it since there's no one else. I was going to call the question, so go ahead, Chair.
Okay. I just want to add one clarifying to the question of who determines the age appropriateness or who determines the content, if it should be removed according to law or not. According to this particular policy, model policy, it would be a committee, not a single individual. That may differ in other LEAs. Okay, let's go ahead and take a vote. Vice Chair Belknap? Oh, let me restate the motion. There's a motion on the floor that the board strike lines 85 through 88 and replace those lines with student access to all copies of the material that is subject to a review request shall be withheld in all schools within the LEA until resolution of the complaint process, at which point the material is either retained or removed from all schools in the LEA. And then it would add or replace in H, it would read student access to all copies of the material that is subject to a review request shall be withheld in all schools within the LEA until resolution of the complaint process, at which point the material is either retained or removed from all schools in the LEA. Please vote. Vice Chair Belknap?
No.
Member Booth?
No.
Member Cline?
Yes.
Member Earl?
No.
Member Hanson?
No.
Member Hutchings? No. Member Hymas?
No.
Member Lear?
No.
Member Moss?
No.
Member Norton?
No.
Member Straight?
No.
This motion does not pass. I believe we are back to Member Earl for another motion.
Thank you. If you can pull that up, it would be motion 2. And my motion is to strike must and add may, include the following, and then strike apply to determine the material's serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, including, and to move that down to this V section that says, in deciding whether the material taken as a whole has serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value as described in subsection U, the committee should consider that serious value does not mean any value. And I actually have a change on this one. Oh, no, sorry. Thank you, Angie. Greater protection should exist concerning content for a library in an elementary or middle school setting. So I appreciate you. That's a little different than I had. So those are more or less from the AG's memo, but just creates greater clarity there.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Earl, you kind of spoke a little bit about it. Do you want to speak again or?
Sorry, I always do that and I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
Anyways, no, I just think it's clear that they may use these items. They may use some other items too, but these items may be used, and then just the clarity on what the committee should consider specifically when you're dealing with the age of students, and also that when dealing with serious literary value, just that needs to be not just any literary value or any piece, but it needs to be seriously looked at and adhered to.
Okay, thank you. Member Cline?
I would just like to make an amendment to this motion.
We have an amendment to the amendment.
Okay. I would take out the language on the second line the material taken as a whole and consider. Okay, strike that, and then strike which must or may include the following objective criteria.
Could you say that one more time?
Strike starting at which through criteria. And then I would also strike 1, 2, and 3. And then in V, strike taken as a whole. And then, I would add a number 3 on V that says sexually explicit content has no serious value for minors.
Does that complete your motion?
Yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Board Member Earl is seconded. Would you like to speak to it, Board Member Cline?
I'm happy to read through it so that people
Well, I
can
think
see.
you've already read, I think we've already read through it as you made it, but if you would like to
Okay.
speak to the content or speak to the motion.
Again, it just simplifies it to be more objective and in line with HB 374. I feel like some of this other language adds some subjectivity to it. And I just like the clear language. And as well as the taken as a whole. I know that that's a sticky point for many people. But HB 374 was specifically written to create bright line definitions where if it violates any of those provisions in the law, that it can be rejected and without when it comes to these things. And I just don't like the double standard that it creates when we have a standard for movies. Right? Anything vulgar or inappropriate in a movie immediately disqualifies it from being used in school. And yet we've kind of introduced a different standard with books where, we have to take the material taken as a whole in order to decide. And yeah, so I just don't feel like, anyway, I think I've said enough. I think it's clear.
Thank you. Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. I think first, I'll speak against cherry picking items from the AAG's memo and not considering it as a whole. And in general, not considering literature in particular as a whole under a bright line standard where we're not considering things as a whole. The Bible, Shakespeare, numerous other pieces of literature that have been considered classic would be pulled from shelves because they contain one or more elements that are listed in the law. And when not considered as a whole, that would have them pulled. I don't know if that's really the intent of what we want to do here, but I certainly speak against that.
Thank you. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple things. I do like the addition of some of the language here. I can't see. Can you go down further? Is it around the screen? Yeah, just the addition there, the sexually explicit content, which is not what, there's a difference between implicit content, which we see in a lot of our classical literature, and then explicit content, which is what we're seeing in a lot of current literature that we're seeing. So Those are just my comments.
Thank you.
Cindy, I have a comment. It's
Go
Earl.
ahead.
If no one else is raising their hand, I would just like to speak again against removing taken as a whole. It would be much easier to have this discussion if there wasn't about at least five U.S. Supreme Court cases that also add to this discussion, but they do, and they also add to the discussion about HB 374. That's not the only law on the subject, and it's a necessity in my reading of the law that and the federal law and the Supreme Court law, as well as the law that we have in Utah, that items are taken as a whole. So to remove that would be, I think, just inviting not only litigation, but inviting censorship. And I don't think it's a necessary thing to add. I think it's necessary to have and shouldn't be removed. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Straight. You're muted.
So I agree with the points made by members Hanson and Lear in regards to this. And when I look at the purpose of writing this policy in the first place, we're trying to be of assistance to LEAs, not create greater liability for them. I think this would create greater liability.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, we have a motion and an amendment to the amendment on the floor, and it would involve in lines 137 through 144, section U, striking the material taken as a whole and consider, striking which must or may include the following objective criteria, striking items 1, 2, and 3, and striking taken as a whole in part V, and adding sexually explicit content has no serious value for minors in part 3. Please vote. Vice Chair Belknap,
No.
Member Booth,
No.
Member Cline,
Yes.
Member Earl,
No.
Member Hanson,
No.
Member Hutchings,
No.
Member Hymas,
Yes.
Member Lear,
No.
Member Moss,
No.
Member Norton,
No.
Member Straight.
No.
This motion does not pass. We are back to an amendment. Board Member Earl has made an amendment as written in lines 137 through 144. It would strike applied to determine the material's serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, including. Am I correct so far, Board Member Earl?
Yes, you are.
Okay, it would leave items 1, 2, and 3, so we're not confused. It would leave taken as a whole in V and would continue as written. Seeing no,
So I
do
have
you
a-
have a final comment, Board Member Earl?
And
I do.
Cindy, I have a comment. If
Okay, let's, Carol, I'm gonna go to Board Member Earl and then Moss and then you, Member Lear.
all right, thank you.
So just a quick note that this particular section, if you could go back up just a little bit, who's ever driving a little bit more, is reference to vulgarity and violence. Just wanted to make that note, both for public and otherwise. So we are addressing 374 and other sections of this, and it could be relevant to this as well, but that's what we're looking at in this particular piece. Anyways,
Thank you.
that's
Thanks
my
for that
comment.
clarification. Board Member Moss?
I'll just speak in favor of the amendment. I think there's been a lot of clarity added by the AG's opinion, and there are different levels at which you can interpret the law. I think this incorporates the broadest view of the law, but also points out that when you're looking at it as a whole, that does not mean that something that has some literary value outweighs extreme vulgarity. That does not nullify the harm to young children that can come from that type of material that meets that standard. And we've all gone through that a number of times of when it constitutes the prurient interest and graphic depiction. So I think this helps provide a comprehensive view of what that balance looks like. And if there's just a little bit of literary value and a lot of vulgarity, then that's the kind of thing that should be pulled, especially for young children. So.
Thank you, Member Moss. Member Lear?
I have to speak against this amendment. I think that this is the cherry picking that Member Hansen referred to. We have the AG's opinion, the official memorandum from the Attorney General attached to this. To take out of context that serious value doesn't mean any value is not a thorough statement and thorough restatement of what the Attorney General said in her memo. And I think it is a poor idea to do that. I also think that changing the may to the must is a rather important change, that the must requires the committee to look at all of the aspects of a work, and not just a piece of it or a word of it. So I think that it's important that it must be reviewed using expert reviews. Community standards are already going to be imposed by the committee members, or committee experience and background will already be imposed, but community standards are important to leave in there. And I think it's important to remember we're recommending language to LEAs, and in doing so, I think it's important to recommend the right things for LEAs to do, and that would include reviewing a work using those particular standards. And I also think I'm just very opposed to cherry picking the Attorney General's memo, which is again a problem in these changes. So I would very much oppose this amendment.
Member Hansen?
Speak briefly in opposition, mainly for the reasons that Member Lear just articulated. I think changing to may means that the committee can make an arbitrary decision rather than having to work through those elements where they look at reviews. They, of course, use their own experience and background, and they consider community standards. So I just don't see that adds value, and in fact, gives the committee less direction on what they should do. And then the AAG's memo has a big discussion about taken as a whole, and is contained in many different paragraphs. And we've attached the whole memo to the model policy so that committees can consider it as a whole. We should consider the memorandum as a whole, just like we should consider the library materials as a whole, and not just pull out areas that may suit our purpose in one or two areas. So I'll speak against it.
Thank you. Board Member Moss? So you took your hand down. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, just two notes. So when we're saying we're going to allow them to choose what they're doing, but then we're saying you must do it this way, that is the very opposite. We are leaving that language in there for their consideration, which doesn't mean you can't do it that way. So just speaking to that. And then we're giving directives at the top by having the must in there, but then at the bottom, articulating what would be considered valuable in looking at those criteria, I think is valuable to have in there. So those, I'm just finishing up my comments with that.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, we'll take a vote. We have a motion on the floor. As previously stated and written on your screen, please vote. Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Cline?
I appreciate the May and the other additions. But I want it to be on record that I oppose the parts that I tried to strike earlier. So
Are you a yes or a
that
no?
said, I will support this amendment.
Are you a yes?
Yes.
Board Member Earl,
Yes.
Member Hanson,
No.
Member Hutchings,
Yes.
Member Hymus,
Yes.
Member Lear,
No,
Member Moss,
Yes.
Member Norton,
No,
Member Straight.
No,
This motion passes. I think we're back to Member Hanson for a motion.
Thank you. I will, Jeff can get those, or I'm sorry, I forgot who's driving. Is that? Thank you. I'll combine motions number 1, 2, and 3 that are listed there and move that the board include the word name in line 53. So it will read the employee's name and title that reviewed the material. That the board add, identify gaps or deficits in the library's collection, lines after line 65, and the board strike lines 79 and 80, which state that the identity of the requester will be protected and kept confidential.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor that in line 53, we would add the word name, the employee's name and title reviewed the material. And you combined it with motion 2, correct?
2 and 3.
To add, identify gaps or deficits in the library's collection and strike lines 79 and 80, which read the identity of the requester will be protected and kept confidential from all individuals involved in any review process outlined in this policy to the extent possible. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay,
Can I speak
thank
to?
you. Yes, you may speak to the motion.
Thank you. So let me talk about 1 and 3 first together. I believe that this process should be subjected to sunlight as much as possible. And also that if we discover trends or problems that we're able to correct those. Therefore, I think it's important to know who was the person who reviewed materials when they came into the library and what criteria did they use, how did they apply that. Then if we see that many books are being challenged and the challenge is holding up and they're all related to a particular employee, then we can give that employee direction or training on how to apply the criteria. We can help to solve the problem at the beginning when things are coming in. So I think that is important to know who is doing that initial review. And on the back end, when we have someone who is making a challenge, I think that practically it would be very difficult to protect and keep confidential that information. That person needs to express why they're challenging the book. They need to put that challenge into context, and they also need to own the challenge and have enough, be willing to put their name out there as challenging. Otherwise, anonymous tips or anonymous challenges can be very dangerous, where that can be done with no responsibility on the party of the person raising the challenge. Challenges could be raised just for the purpose of making a challenge. And then the system can get, again, bogged down and not function properly. So I just think transparency is important in all aspects of this process. We should know who is doing the reviews, who's making the challenge, and that should be public knowledge. The other one, motion number 2, is just an ad that I think makes sense. If the LEAs are going to go through their collections in the libraries and try to determine whether books should be retained or whether they're outdated and that sort of thing, they should also use that information to identify gaps or deficits in the collection. If they have that information in front of them, they can say, hey, we do not have books in this particular area or materials in this particular area that should be included in our library. And so it's just another use of the data that comes in. Thank you.
Thank you. And both Board Member Hymas and Moss put their hands up while I was reading the initial motion. So I apologize if I'm not in order, but let's go with Board Member Hymas.
Thank you. Just a couple questions for Member Hanson here. And well, a question and a concern. Member Hanson, can you help me or by addressing, first off, is this public? When you asked for the employee's name, would that be public or would that be to the committee?
If I can answer, Chair.
Please.
So I just think the name needs to be retained. This isn't to be said that it's public, but the committee would know, the LEA would know there's a record of who reviewed the materials.
Thank you, Chair. Can I go on just for one more?
Yes, please.
The other thought that I have or concern that I have is sometimes when you hear a name of somebody who has submitted something, you have a prejudice. You automatically say, well, that person's this, or I know that person, you know, this is, and so we kind of base our decisions off of who is making the request. And so there's just a couple of concerns. One, I don't want that at all. I want the decision of the committee to be based on what the content is. And two, I do not want to put anybody in harm's way by having it publicly made. Now, if they publicly come out and say that, that's great. And I agree that if somebody is willing to make or wanting to make a request, they should own up to that. Absolutely. But I don't want the LEA to have to put somebody in any sort of, I think danger is a little bit strong, but you know what I mean? Like putting their name out there. I don't want to discourage anybody from doing what they think is best or what they feel is best. Some people are happy to say, yeah, this is me and this is what I support. And others just want to say, hey, just take a look at this. I support your decision, but I don't really necessarily think that this book is quite appropriate. So I guess I go back to two things. One, I'd like to divide, and then two, I would support. I support motion 2, but I'm struggling to support motions 1 and 3.
There's a motion on the floor to divide the question. Do we have a second?
How's he dividing, Chair?
He's dividing out motion 2 and putting 1 and 3 together. So 2 will be one question and 1 and 3 will be another question. Is that correct, Member Hymas?
That is correct, and I'll speak to it if you once you're finished.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I would second it, but I would ask that they all be separated out.
Can't do
Well,
that.
you can't.
Yeah, if Matt would be willing to do that.
Is that would you like to do that, Member Hymas? Or do you want to keep your motion?
I would like to keep going. I would like to keep going, and I'll speak to that in a second.
Okay, so the motion stands as it is. Do you still want to second, Member Cline?
No.
I'll
Okay.
second Moss.
Okay, Moss second. So we have a motion to divide. So we will first take Member Hanson's motion 2. If anyone would like to speak to motion 2, please raise your hand now. Member Cline?
So motion 2, can you just clarify what it is we're talking about? Oh, so that motion. Okay. No, I don't have anything to say regarding motion 2.
Okay, thank you. Member Earl?
Yes, I think we just added a whole nother layer to this whole policy by doing this. This is we're going to now ask them to identify gaps. What gaps are we going to ask them to identify? What deficits are we going to ask them to identify? I just think this is adding more confusion to what we're trying to do here. And then the other piece is we aren't writing standards for librarians or media specialists. That we have a whole other component that we can do that with. That's where this lies, right? That's the job or responsibility of the librarian or whoever is over the media within the district or the LEA. So now when we're talking about identifying gaps, I'm not even sure exactly where we're headed with that or what a gap looks like, or I mean, it opens all kinds of new questions, and then I think it bogs down this whole process. And so I would not be for this here. I do think this is something that needs to take place, responsibility of a librarian, and that belongs in other places within our, within our rules and our policies, but not here. And if we wanted to bring up back up our standards, which I think it incorporates elements of this in there already, then we can rework those if we want, but I don't think we want to bog down this process more.
Point of order.
Please, Member Hutchings.
Are we discussing the motion to divide, or do we need to vote on that motion?
We
didn't vote, right?
We had a motion and a second, but we didn't vote. We haven't voted yet.
If we have not voted on the motion to divide, then we need to do that. Thank you, Board Member Hutchings. I have a bunch of texts. I see someone maybe have tried to tell me that. Thank you. Let's go ahead and vote. This is on the question to divide. Vice Chair Belknap?
No.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Cannon, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I spaced out there for a bit. My vote is no.
Member Cline?
Yes.
Member Earl?
Yes.
Member Hanson?
No.
Member Hutchings?
Yes.
Member Hymas?
Yes.
Member Lear? No. Member Moss?
Yes.
Member Norton?
Sorry, yes.
Member Straight? Member Straight to divide the question?
Yes.
That motion passes. So we'll go back and take motion 2 and then motion 1 and 3. We've already started talking about those, but I would ask if you've already spoken to let other board members speak and just try to get your comments into one comment per amendment or amendment to the amendment so that we can get through a bunch of these before we end this meeting. Member Moss.
I'll just speak to 1 and 3. Is that appropriate?
Right now, we're going to take number 2 first.
I apologize, Cindy. Okay,
That's okay.
I'll hold.
Okay, Member Cline. Okay, if you could take your hand down.
Sorry, I
Thank you.
just wanted to speak.
No problem. Did you? Okay, thank you so much. I see no other hands. Please vote on motion number 2. Vice Chair Belknap.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Cannon.
Yes.
Member Cline.
No.
Member Earl.
No.
Member Hanson.
Yes.
Member Hutchings.
No.
Member Hymas.
No.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Moss.
No.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
And I'm a no on that one, so that motion does not pass.
So Cindy, will you give the count of yays and nays on that, please?
Do you want me to review how each?
No,
member-
just say the numbers.
The number is 8 no and 7 yes. Well, no,
Okay.
sorry, that's not true because we don't have a full. We have 8 no, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that is right. Okay, wait, let me recount. 7 yes. 6 no. But we don't
Thank
have
you. I think
8.
that might give clarity as we're moving forward, because I
Okay.
think we need to double check on one that we did earlier as well.
I was a yes on that one, if
Okay.
that's the question. It was also a tie, and I was a yes on that amendment.
Thank you.
And it
Thank
passed.
you.
Doesn't it require a vote of 8
Yes,
to pass?
pass, correct. There were
So
7.
are you saying that your vote gave the 8
No,
necessary?
this
for it
was
to
one
pass?
before, Janet. This is
Oh,
one
I'm
before.
sorry.
No, that was prior. Okay, let's go to motion 1 and 3. Would you like to speak, Board Member Hanson, to these motions?
I think that I spoke before, but just to clarify, on the first one, the employee's name, if you read that in context, it states that a record of reviewed materials will be maintained by each school within the LEA and include, and then the name would be included there instead of just the employee's title. Because it says now the employee's title would be retained. My only intent there is to make sure that we're clear on who did that specifically, if there are more than one person with that title, or if people change in that role, so that we could see if there are any trends or training issues that need to be taken care of with regard to a particular employee. So other than that, I think I've spoken.
Okay, thank you. We've had some others speak on this particular issue as well. Seeing no other, oh, sorry, Board Member Moss.
I'll just speak quickly. This is a difficult issue. We've all gotten a fairly broad range of emotionally heated comments and feedback. I just agree that I don't see how it adds to the ability to evaluate the difficult criteria they have to apply, and it presents the possibility of bias for or against a particular requester or employee. And we're just in an environment when the names come out and we have issues of doxing and issues of, communications that are accusatory. Why did you do this? How could you possibly, that kind of thing. So I'm normally very much in favor of transparency. I just have a hard time seeing the upside here, and I see a significant potential for downside, either on the ability to make a decision free from bias towards or against an individual, and possibly the threat of harassment of an individual because they were involved, given sort of the heated climate we're in. So I'd have to vote against.
Thank you, Member Earl.
Yes. Under the form that we have here, it does allow for the name to be collected for the requester and that information to be stored there already. So when we remove this, I have the same concerns as others have expressed, that we are opening the door for possibly people not feeling comfortable within their school environment, actually questioning a book. And I don't think we want to open that door. And I do have concerns with maybe doxing of an employee too, or someone. I do think we need to know that it's been reviewed, the type of person that reviewed it, contents about it, but I do have concerns on both of these about maybe the abuses that could take place. So, and I think districts have got to be real cautious, as well as schools. It's a very localized and sometimes very heated and charged, as we know from emails we're getting and various things. So I would speak against these particular motions.
Thank you, Board Member Cline.
So I wanted to divide because I agree that we should have a record of the employee's name that reviewed it, but that employee's name, like the parent or whoever filed a complaint, should be kept confidential to the extent possible from the public, but kept in case there is a possible court proceeding, so that, you know, they could possibly testify as to why they felt it was appropriate to bring that material in or to exclude that material. And so I would vote in favor of motion 1, but against motion 3 for the reasons that have been stated, that we want to protect parents and others from that harassment that they will likely receive, that many of us have received as we've tried to deal with these difficult issues. We want to protect that to the extent possible from public knowledge, but kept for the sake of the record. And the form does require that all portions be filled out, including the name. So nobody can submit, or if it doesn't require it, it should, because we don't want lots of anonymous complaints submitted. We need to know who's submitting it, but that name should be protected from public as much as possible. And so I would actually make a motion to amend this one and split motion 1 and 2 for that reason. Should be voted on separately.
Sybil, once you've divided the question, can you divide it again? Or Brian?
Can you restate that? I'm sorry.
Once you've divided the question, can you divide it again? In this particular case, the question, there were 3 motions combined, then it was divided to take number 2 separately from 1 and 3 combined. And now a member would like to separate 1 and 3. Can you divide the question once the question has been divided?
And that original motion to divide was passed. Yeah, I think you could do another motion to divide the remaining combined questions.
Actually, can we do this? Because, okay, it was proposed earlier, but it was not a friendly amendment. So I guess we would vote on this again. So there's a motion on the table to divide the question, to divide out numbers 1 and 3. Do we have a second?
I'll second. Booth.
Okay, we have a second. Members, this is to divide questions 1 and 3. Sybil, remind me, I think we take speakers for and against on divide the question, correct? Or do we move to an immediate vote?
Move to an immediate vote.
Okay, Vice Chair Belknap?
No.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Cannon?
No.
Member Cline?
Yes.
Member Earl?
Yes.
Member Hanson?
No.
Member Hutchings?
Yes.
Member Hymas?
No.
Member Lear? Member Lear? You're muted.
Sorry, no.
Member Moss?
Yes.
Member Norton?
Yes.
Member Straight?
Yes.
Chair Huntsman is here. Vice Chair.
Welcome, Chair Huntsman. Would you like to divide the question?
No.
Okay, that motion does not pass. So we're back to voting. We already voted on number 2. Now we're voting on motions 1 and 3 combined. If you have a comment to make about 1 and 3 combined and you haven't spoken yet, please put your hand up. Board Member Straight?
Yes, I guess I'm a little bit confused on this one. And so I'm kind of asking the question, not making a support or not support.
Okay.
So is this like for us when we have executive session? In other words, when they have when they get together is this review, they keep a record, it's recorded, but it's not public knowledge. But if the court needs to review it, they can. I'm trying to understand how this works, the employee's name and confidentiality and things like that, because I don't want to put anyone in danger from either side of any argument. I think.
Okay, AAG Quisenberry, if the
Go
name,
ahead.
can I ask the AAG member straight, are you okay with that? AAG Quisenberry, can you answer member Straight's question? If the name is included in the record, could that become public knowledge of the reviewer?
Yes, in fact, I'm having a text conversation with Jeff and Angie and Ashley about this right now. The bill does not contain an exception to grandma applying. And so thus a whistleblower's name wouldn't be protected under the bill. However, and I was trying to text Ben Rasmussen about this to see if grandma has a provision that protects whistleblowers. And if it does, then that would apply here. And so that's what I'm trying to kind of figure out myself. I don't know if other staff might have already looked at that, might be able to chime in.
Okay. Member Hanson, do you want to go back and address that to your motion?
Yeah, just on this issue, I think that there are some really difficult legal issues if we try to protect this information. And I don't see how this situation is different than all the folks that we have give public comment in our meetings. Have an issue, they show up, they state their name, they tell us what they think about the issue. Yes, they subject themselves to some opposing views on those comments, but I don't think we can fix all of society's woes by making this whole process anonymous. And if our committee cannot be unbiased and impartial, looking at a name on a list, then shame on the committee. We should have new people on the committee if they can't do that. But our judicial system deals with people in person all the time. Our public comments are all in person. More transparency and more sunlight we can have in here, the process will be. People can face the issues head on and deal with them. Anyway, that's beyond the scope, but I think that we get into a real issue if we say that these things are going to be kept confidential, and then we can't do that. We can't follow through and keep them confidential because of the processes and grandma that are involved.
Thank you. Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Davis. So as Board Member Hanson stated, currently there's not an exception under grandma. So if somebody, let's play this out and say somebody makes a request for removal or reconsideration of a book. It could be in the LEA's policy and protocol that they don't proactively provide the names of certain individuals in the process, and that could be part of their procedure or process. But if there was a request for that information under grandma, the identity would be public, and there's currently no exception under grandma. I know that AAG Questenberry mentioned whistleblower, but if we were to look at the definition of whistleblower, I am fairly confident that this is not a current, portion of the definition, this HB 374 process or a process for removal. So we would need grandma to be amended to provide an exception. So just wanted to clarify that there's one thing could be about the process and what is proactively provided, whether you keep E in there, it might be part of the process. But if somebody were to ask or make a grandma request, that would be something the LEA would have to provide. Currently, there's no exception under grandma.
Thank you. Board Member Cline.
Okay, so I see 1 and 3 as being a double standard, where if we only protect one, we protect one, but not the other. And so I think there needs to be some consistency there, but I also think that they each of, the individual submitting the complaint, as well as the employee that does the reviewing, that their names should be kept confidential to the extent possible. And I would love to, if we can separate, if we could have separated those out, I would have, or maybe I can offer an amendment to motion 1, where it says, where we add the language to that the employee's name be protected and kept confidential to the extent possible, like it does in E.
We have an amendment on the floor to add, be protected to the extent possible, or is the wording to be kept confidential to the extent possible?
Correct.
And do we have a second?
Well, I would also.
Sorry, I was going to seek a clarification.
Okay, board member Cline, were you going to add additional?
I was going to add some additional language that we also instruct staff to work with legislators to create that carve out in the grandma law to protect them from their names being exposed through grandma requests.
Okay, so there's an amendment to the amendment proposed, which is to add to motion number 1, and the name be kept confidential to the extent possible with a request. Well, I think we need to do that in 2 separate motions, board member Cline, because this would be language that would go into this policy, and the language of the second wouldn't be put into this policy.
That's fine. I'm happy with that. I just wanted to get my idea out there so people understand what, where we're going with this, or where I'm going with it.
Okay, so in motion number 1, the amendment to the amendment is to add that the names of the committee members would be kept confidential to the extent possible.
Or the employee's name that reviewed the material. Not the committee names, but the employee name that reviewed the material.
In the committee, in the review committee? The employee in the review committee? What employee?
I was thinking the employee that reviewed the material as it came into the school initially. Or that reviewed the material. I guess it could be both. Because we have material coming in that's being procured that an employee is supposed to be vetting to make sure that it complies with the law, as well as the committee that reviews complaints that come from the public.
Deputy Superintendent.
And I don't know that I don't want to keep the complaint or the committee members' names confidential.
Well, let's clarify.
Line 53 deals with the material coming.
Let's clarify line 53. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, can you tell us if line 53 refers to the original reviewer when the material came into the library, or a reviewer in the committee, or what? You're muted.
I just realized I hadn't unmuted myself. Sorry. I believe it is referring to the person who originally reviewed it, but I wanted to clarify that there's 2 issues here. I mean, the way that this one is written here is a little different than what is in E below. And so that's why you can't just mirror the language exactly. So one says that the record of the reviewed materials maintained by each school needs to include this information. So if you wanted to, you wouldn't even need a grandma exception. If you don't want the information to be of record or ever divulged, you just would strike number 6, because that would mean you're not collecting that information to begin with. So if you want the information, however, you'd keep it here. And then as to the confidentiality of it, you would probably need to address that in a separate portion of because this, as you look at E, It's really talking about what you're collecting, what's included in the record of reviewed materials. It isn't talking about, in this part, how you handle that information, whether you keep it confidential or not. So this is where it gets awkward when we do group drafting on the fly, is sometimes the motion is wanted doesn't quite, the wording doesn't quite fit the full context of what you're trying to amend. So maybe if you helped us as staff know what is that you want, do you want the information collected but keep it private, or would you not want the information to be collected at all?
I would like the information to be collected. Sorry, but so if you have a suggestion as to where we could add that other language in here, that would be great.
So on number 6, you're asking for an amendment to the amendment to say, to add the words on number 6, the employee's name and title that reviewed the material initially, I'm assuming, and be kept confidential to the extent possible. That's the language you would like added. Do we have a second? Can the chair second? I just don't want the whole world coming after, a librarian that worked there 5 years ago that did, an initial review or something that missed page 356. I'm going to second if that's allowable for the chair.
You cannot, Chair.
I can't second. Okay.
This is Board Member Cannon. I will second.
Okay.
Can I speak to this at some point, Cindy?
Yep.
For a long time.
Yeah, you can't. You're in the queue. Okay, Board Member Earl and then Board Member Lear. And then, well, actually, let's hear from Deputy Superintendent Stallings. You still have your hand up. Board Member Earl and then Board Member Lear.
All right. I think this is just meant to be a general materials information piece. And I don't really think adding the name here is of value. And when we add, as part of this motion, which shall be kept confidential to the extent possible, what we're doing is we're allowing this one to be kept confidential, but this is all built into the same motion. But then parents' information, or whoever it is that's making that initial requester, we're striking the language that keeps their information confidential. So it seems to be, there's a duplicity going on here. I'm not in favor of, in this section, retaining that name in the first place, because this is just.
Member Earl, the only thing we're discussing right now is if this amendment passes to add the name, it would add this piece, which shall be kept confidential to the extent possible. If then we go back and then potentially the one you are speaking to, sounds like you're speaking against adding.
But it's relevant in being aware that in adding this, that the motion we will go back to next will actually have a contradiction. So it is relevant in that. And if you pass this, it has a contradiction for one being kept confidential and the other not. So it is relevant.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Lear.
I don't think it's a contradiction. I think it's a different policy decision. I personally think that they're going to be, it imposes a burden. Keep in mind, again, we have to remind ourselves over and over, this is a model policy. And there's some language later that says that something must be consistent with this model policy. That's nonsense. This is a model policy that LEAs can use or not and take on their own legal liability or not. But in doing this, we're making policy decisions all down the list. I feel like there will be many times when we don't know who the employee was that 10 years ago allowed a book into a library. So I think we're putting a big burden on LEAs to try to track down these names or believe they should. I think that a public employee's names and actions have to be public information. They may not be readily provided by the LEA, but underground, I think they have to be public information. I think the same is true when we come to the, I know you don't want to speak to both of them, But I think the same is true. If someone's going to advocate for a position, she should be willing to put her name out there, and there could be retaliation either way. We're acting like the employees would never be retaliated against, but oh my gosh, those parents need protection. And I think that's nonsense. I think the names should be a matter of record and they should be provided upon request. So I think this is unnecessary. The employee's name should be a matter of record if it's even available. But again, it's a choice by an Elliott.
Board Member Cline, and then let's try to move to a vote on this if we can, seeing no other hands.
Sorry, I just wanted to thank Jennie for her explanation. That is what I was trying to get at, is the double standard that we were creating. And so I'm not sure how we can, if we are for one and against the other, I don't know how we're supposed to vote on this.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote on the amendment to the amendment, which is to say, if the amendment on number 6, adding the name, passes, it would also include keeping that name confidential to the extent possible. Let's go ahead and vote on that. Board Member Belknap?
No.
Booth? Member Booth?
No.
Member Cannon?
No.
Member Cline?
Yes.
Member Earl?
No.
Member Hanson?
No.
Member Hutchings?
No.
Member Hymas?
No.
Member Lear?
No.
Member Moss?
Yes.
Member Norton?
No.
Member Straight?
No.
That motion does not pass.
Huntsman's a no.
Oh, I'm sorry, I crossed you out earlier. I will circle you as being back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're back to the original amendment, and we are discussing motions, a combination of 1 and 3 from Member Hanson. And 1 includes on number 6, on line 53 on number 6, adding name and includes striking lines 79 and 80, which comprise section E. Member Earl?
Yeah, and maybe Board Member Hanson can create some clarity for me. I'm trying to understand, because the document allows for the name to be collected. What do you see this, by striking this, you're hoping to what? What is that this is publicized, that what is I'm just trying to fully understand the intent of not keeping it confidential, or at least that courtesy there to the extent possible. And where they are collecting the name, it's not like it's anonymous. We're not having a random person. If there wasn't a name associated with it, it wouldn't get pushed forward. So maybe just some clarity if you don't mind.
We okay, Chair?
Sure.
Okay. I just think that practically to try to protect and keep confidential that name is almost an impossibility. I think this puts a burden on the committee that just shouldn't be there to meet. If someone puts their name on the list, they would, I expect, come and explain themselves to this review committee. The review committee would want to ask them questions. I don't think it should be put in the school newspaper or published with the PTA or put on social media or anything like that. But the person should own it and the person should interact with the process. That's all. I just think this is a burden. When it says to the extent possible, I think the extent possible would be almost zero. It would not be able to protect the name and identity of the person making the comment.
Thank you. Member Cline?
So I don't think that whoever submits the complaint, they can still interact with the process. They can still come and give public comment. It's just that the public doesn't have to know that the complaint originated with them.
Thank you. Member Moss?
I wonder if I might propose an amendment to the amendment. Is that in order?
Okay, yes.
The amendment would be the identity of the requester will be protected and kept confidential from all individuals outside of the review process outlined in this policy to the extent possible.
Member Moss, I may have misstepped. We can only have one amendment to the amendment, and we've already had one amendment to the amendment.
Okay, fair enough.
Point of order, I don't think that's correct. I think we can continue to amend as long as there's not two amendments after one after another. You can continue to amend something.
So we
Vice
had
Chair
one
Davis?
amendment to this amendment. Can we have more than one amendments to an amendment?
You can, as long as they're not on top of each other.
Yeah.
Does that make
Okay,
sense?
so since we've already voted for one, we can add another one?
Yes.
Okay, Board Member
Yeah,
Moss, what's
that's
your
correct.
language?
It would be the identity of the requester will be protected and kept confidential from all individuals outside of any review process outlined in this policy to the extent possible.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Board Member Earl is a second. So we have an amendment to the amendment, which would add the language that says, would add the words outside of the involved.
No, sorry, it would replace. So it would say all individuals outside of any review process. It would take out the words. There we go.
The identity of the requester will be protected and
Delete-
kept
delete those
confidential
words. Yes,
from all individuals outside of the review process.
correct.
Thank you. Member Earl was a second. Member Lear, are you speaking to the amendment to the amendment?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
I oppose this. I think consistent with the employee's name being available, the advocate's name for against the material, I guess that is a contradiction. But the person who's bringing the concern, her name must be should be available, and it's as written, it's ambivalent, it's uncertain outside of the review process. When does that start? When does that end? When it's over, then grandma would allow someone to request that from the LEA.
Member Lear,
Yes,
I just wanted to make sure we're very specific to the amendment to the amendment, which is not to say that that's going to pass, that the original one's going to pass, but if it does, it would bring the committee in.
I think we're overthinking this in a whole picture.
Okay, so are you against the amendment?
I am against the amendment because I think the individual's name should be public. And
Are you against the amendment to the amendment or the amendment?
The amendment and the amendment to the amendment. Both.
Okay, the amendment is to make it public.
Right. And it should be public even beyond the review process, because we don't know exactly, no one's defined. This is when the review process starts, this is when it ends.
Okay, Member Moss. Okay, go ahead and finish, sorry.
Let me finish. Because even in the end, grammar request would probably bring that information to a member to someone who made that request. So I think you put a burden on LEAs. If you say outside of the review process, does that mean the person testifies in a mask to the committee if she wants to, or brings her concerns to the committee in a mask? Or must her face be blurred if she makes a video? I think if a person has a concern in the review process, outside of the review process, the person should be willing to be an advocate for her position. There's going to be no more retaliation. There could be retaliation. It could go either way. I think we are burdening this process with greater technicalities than are necessary, when ultimately almost all of this information will be available under a GRAMA request, and it should be if we believe in transparency.
Thank you. Member Moss, and then I'll be moving to a vote. See no other hands.
Quick response. Regardless of when the review process starts or when it ends, the intent here is just to say within that process, they'll know who the person is. But outside the process, it shouldn't be a matter for public shaming or deterrence. I do think, given the heat surrounding this, that it could have the effect of chilling the willingness to step up and make a request. So this would make sure the process functions, the person's identity would be known within that process. And if a grandma request is made, it's going to be complied with. That would override this. So when we say to the extent possible, and we often do this in the law, where we hold things confidential, except to the extent compelled by law. And so, when we say the extent possible, grandma request comes in, you got to comply. This would allow then the identity to be used within the review process and in a grandma request, but it would prevent the disclosure to the public for reasons that don't assist the completion of the review process. They simply would put them out there, subject to either on the front end, chilling the willingness to come forward, or on the back end, some sort of, shaming, harassment, contention that's not necessary. It would distract. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. A very quick follow-up, Board Member Lear, and then let's vote on this motion.
I have to say, any shaming or retaliation would be equally needed against the employee or this person if they both pass. And I think that we are over processing this and expecting retaliation and mean-spirited behavior. And I don't think that's appropriate. And I think we should just expect that an advocate can speak her mind and an employee can do his job. And then we go forward with that. And I think we are, and I know that the law requires, can allow for confidentiality to the extent possible. I also think it gives a false sense of security to someone who believes that her name might be kept confidential, and it won't.
Thank you, board members. We have an amendment to the amendment on the floor, and it would involve in line 79 to 80, section E, replacing the words involved in any with outside of the, as written on your screen. Board members, please vote. Vice Chair Belknap.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Cannon.
No.
Member Cline.
Yes.
Member Earl.
Yes.
Member Hanson.
No.
Member Hutchings.
Yes.
Member Hymas.
Yes.
Member Lear.
No.
Chair Hanson, I apologize.
Huntsman.
Chair Huntsman. I keep looking.
Huntsman.
Hanson, right on my screen. Huntsman. Chair Huntsman.
Keep going, Cindy. I know he's there.
Member Moss.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Straight.
No.
Chair Huntsman.
Maybe he had to step out. Go ahead.
7, 8. This motion passes without him, with 8 yeses. Actually, with 9 yeses. I'm a yes on that one as well. Okay, let's move to the next one, which is the actual amendment, which combines motion 1 and 3, and it would add line E, name and in motion 3 on lines 79 and 80. I think we need to scroll to see Member Hanson's motion 3. It's to strike lines 79 and 80.
So that's been replaced now, Chair, with the Member Moss's amendment.
Which, yes, would say the identity of the requester will be protected and kept confidential from all individuals outside the review process outlined in this policy to the extent possible. But then your motion would be to strike the whole thing, correct?
No.
No, I think that was amended now. So we're voting on the combination of my motion 1 and Member Moss's motion 3, I believe.
Which would not strike any of the language.
It would just be as shown on the screen. I think that
Okay.
are.
Okay,
Point of clarification, because his amendment was to strike involved in any. I don't think it added back in the other pieces.
yeah. My understanding was that his amendment was that the language in the motion just only replaced outside of the from involved in any, but that your motion would strike the whole thing.
It overrides that though.
So mine would have stricken the whole thing, but that was amended by Member Moss's amendment, I believe.
Okay, so
Just-
since that already
Mine's
passed,
off the-
we only need to vote on number one.
So mine's on
Oh,
the table, and now the combined motion is my motion 1 and Member Moss's motion 3.
But
Right.
if Member Moss's motion 3 doesn't pass, then effectively it takes out those lines anyway.
No,
Because
his
those
already
lines are-
passed. His already passed. It was
I
already.
know, but if yours includes E, it would effectively take out.
no.
It doesn't anymore because we passed
Okay,
the amendment. So it's a new amended E with the previous one with the motion above. I can't see it, but
Yeah.
but it's
Take-
already included in the policy, if I'm understanding what you're saying. There's
Yes.
no more motion to strike it out. There's no reason to vote again on that.
no, you have, because they're both part of the original motion, which was motion 1 and motion 3. Though that's the motion now. There was an amendment to the motion just for that one piece.
So if the noes win on this, what happens to the language in number 3? Can we get a deputy to clarify that?
No. I
Or
believe
Member
it would just
Hanson?
I believe it would just stay as is. If this fails, then neither one of those pass. There's no change made to the master combined memo or whatever this is. And we move on to the next thing.
That would be accurate.
Okay,
So Vice Chair Davis, however, when you read the amendment, you only read those 2 changes. And for me, that's what I voted on, were just those 2 changes.
that is because that was the language in the amendment to the
Yeah,
amendment.
there wasn't an inclusion of everything else.
Correct.
Chair, if I could,
Please?
I think Member Hanson stated it accurately that my amendment was simply an amendment to his amendment and therefore has no life outside of the vote on his amendment. That my amendment that passed only goes if his amendment passes. That, Chair Hanson, am I saying that correctly, Member Hanson?
No, I believe so. I think
Yeah, so mine's not
what was
acceptable.
what was actionable in the beginning was my 1 and 3. Now my 3 was amended by yours. And so the new 1 and 3 are what shown with the combination of my 1 and the one that Member Moss put on the board. And if those fail, they both go off the table, I believe.
Correct. My amendment fails or drops out because it was only amendment to Member Hanson's amendment.
Okay, Member Straight?
Not speaking to that, I'll hold.
Okay, so we are
Vice Chair
voting.
Davis?
Yes.
I still have point of clarification. When you read what the amendment was, and I voted for it, I voted for adding the involved and the outside, not the additional, the rest of it. There were only 2 changes there. Board Member Moss didn't say to add everything back in, or I must have missed it.
So he didn't. The original motion was to strike all of that language. And so my understanding is that you would strike all the language with the amendment to the amendment if this passes, but I'm being told opposite, that actually this language would all be left in as amended, and it's already in the policy like this, but we would just add this amendment. So really, if you vote no, you're going to lose that language anyway. You're not going to lose the strike, you're going to lose the language. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, I see you nodding, but can you add clarity?
Yeah, so first, what might be helpful, Kelsey, if you could scroll down to where it says final motion number 1 and 3 as amended, we've got those now listed as they have been amended. And so I think what the earlier motion was that the board is going to continue to vote for 1 and 3 together in one motion. So they're together as one motion. But to your point, Vice Chair Davis, what you're stating is if this fails, if this next motion fails, assuming there's no more motions to amend, then the language would just be the identity, E would just read, the identity of the requester will be protected and kept confidential from all individuals involved in any review process outlined in this policy to the extent possible. So the language would not be stricken as Board Member Hansen had made a motion. It would just be as it is in the merged master document right now. So it would take out the blue and the red would just be reinstated if this next motion fails.
Okay, Board Member Straight, thank you.
Oh, boy. Okay. So I have a question, and I feel bad about asking this question because I'm not sure it's a good question. So either way, if this motion, either it fails or passes, there is a legal obligation by all members of the review committee to non-disclosure. So there'll be a non-disclosure requirement for this. I don't think that's stated, but I think it can be assumed. And are we out of our lane by prescribing what in my mind would be saying that if someone does leak the identity of someone inside that group, now they have committed some type of violation or put themselves at legal risk. I mean, I understand that from the standpoint of a public official. I guess I'm just confused. I'm sorry if this is, and maybe someone can clear that up for me. And
So without seeing hands, my understanding is to the extent possible, you are correct. They would be required to maintain confidentiality of the requester and maintain that within the committee and not publish it abroad to the extent possible. And then you would have the employee's name that reviewed material to go into the library in the first place in motion number 1, if you voted yes to these. Member Lear?
I have a question. So that means that if someone inadvertently drops the name, if it's an employee, is there going to be professional action against that employee? What's the extent, what's the outcome or the consequence for letting this information be revealed?
I think that would be up to the LEA. Since this is just a model, depending if they even put this part in their policy at all, and they may choose not to. Deputy Superintendent Stallings?
Yes, I was hoping that one of our AG or someone else might answer, but I'm going to first try and answer Board Member Straight's question. I think he asked, regardless of whether this is put in place, if there's a policy that there is some sort of non-disclosure legal requirement outside of this policy for a person's identity to not be a non-disclosure. I am not familiar with a law or precedent related to this process outside of this policy that would say people could not disclose who has made a request under this process. The issue, I think, is what is going to be put in place as far as the policy for the LEA, which you can hear there's a number of different opinions, and that ultimately the LEA will decide whether or not they're going to publicly post these, they're going to make them publicly accessible, keep them protected. But I also am one of our AAGs or Jeff or somebody else may have researched board member Straight's question more specifically. So, and then as to board member Lear's question, I think, again, it will be whatever is in policy. If the policy says you need to keep that confidential and an employee doesn't, there potentially could be employee action, or LEA action against the employee for violating a policy. But I don't know at this point, because this isn't in board rule, it's a model policy only. I don't know that it would reach the level of a UPAC process because it's not a law. Again, unless Brian or somebody else knows about a law that I'm unaware of.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Angie, I agree. Oh yeah, I was going to say, Angie, I agree. Depends if the LEA has a policy that says thou shalt not disclose. And in that case, then yeah, there could be some discipline. If an LEA policy doesn't contain that mandate, then there would not be discipline.
So to clarify, this is sort of just a suggestion, right?
Yes, an encouragement. Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you. I feel better about it already.
Okay, seeing no other hands, we are voting on motion 1 to include name and in the language, and motion 3 as amended, which would read, the identity of the requester will be protected and kept confidential from all individuals outside of the review process outlined in this policy to the extent possible. Please vote. Board Vice Chair Belknap.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Cannon.
Yes.
Member Cline.
Yes.
Member Earl.
Yes.
Member Hanson.
Yes.
Member Hutchings.
Yes.
Member Hymas.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Moss.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
That motion passes.
Yes.
Unanimous. Chair Huntsman.
Yes.
I should never have crossed your name off when you weren't here earlier.
Yeah, you were good. I had some difficulty.
That motion passes unanimously. I want to make board members aware that we have about a half an hour left here. So to my knowledge, we have 2 members who still would like to continue making amendments, and that is board member Earl and board member Hanson. Someone will need to correct me if I'm wrong. So let's go back to board member Earl, and I'm going to ask members, when you speak, to speak as succinctly as possible and not restate your opinion in 4 different ways, but just as quickly as you can, say it in one way if possible. Board member Earl.
Sorry, I had to move it up on my screen. I apologize, couldn't get to the, okay, so I have motion 4 is just the board include the definitions and references document inserted in blue in board member Cline's draft, which is the appendix to the model policy. It's just the simplification of the laws and references. I just would like that included.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second that.
Okay, was that member Hutchings?
Cline.
Cline, member Cline. Sorry, thank you. Okay, would you like to speak to that, member Earl?
Well, I kind of did because I like to do that, but yes, it's just that simplification. I just would like that added. I think it's very concise, directs right to the laws and easy to follow. So,
thank you.
I'm not sure.
Member Earl or Lear?
Sorry, yeah, I didn't get my hand up, but I'm not sure about the timeline part of it. Are we saying the timeline that would be set by the LEA? Is that what you're meaning, Jennie?
timeline, I don't know what you're referring to.
At the end of that, with a timeline in section 5 with a timeline.
We're on motion 4, not motion 3.
Am I reading the wrong one?
Yeah, member Lear, her motion is to include the definitions and references document in member Cline's draft.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Do you want me to come right back to you? Let me go to member Hanson and I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Member Hanson?
Thanks. I wonder if we could get that on the screen so that we can see what we're voting on. As far as what would be added. Because there were quite a few attachments, I believe, to that. And I know there is a definitions and references area. One concern that I have is most of the definitions are taken verbatim, but then there is a big section in red that contains some editorial comment, which I would say is probably not appropriate to include.
No, this is not it yet.
Keep going down. This is in member Cline's 3.5. Yeah, that looks like it. Keep going down. I think it's this.
This is the section.
Okay, so much of this is verbatim, but if you keep going down, there's this as defined. Okay, that is that might be verbatim. Go to the next one. There's a big red section in the middle that's pulled from the AGO's memo. I don't think that we should editorialize or cherry pick this information. I think that our LEAs are certainly looking at the law all the time, and included also, if you keep going down, there are some quotes from the AGO's official memo that say immediately remove books from school libraries, further mitigate risk by engaging in analysis. These are, again, just portions of that memo that needs to be read as a whole. So I appreciate the intent of trying to summarize things and make it easier to look at, but I think that we run the risk of putting a slant on the information. And so I'd be opposed to doing this.
Thank you.
I say attach all the laws and attach the AGO's memo, put that in its entirety.
Right.
Are you amending the amendment?
No, I'd just be against this.
Thank you, Member Lear. Actually, I'm sorry. I think Member Earl was first and then Member Lear.
No, I think Member Lear was.
Okay, Member Lear.
I oppose this also. I don't, the rubric description has a lot of editorializing in it. As I've said over and over, I don't like the idea of taking sentences out of the AG's memo when that is attached, because I think the PICO sentence, or the sentence about PICO, is out of context and is not a complete statement of what the AG's opinion says. And I very much oppose the rubric, though I appreciate the intent of it. It contains a lot of opinion and editorializing that's not been reviewed or approved by the board or our assistant AGs.
Member Earl.
Just for clarification, the rubric is not attached to it, and I did not request that. And I would like to make an amendment to my amendment.
Okay.
I would like to remove the section in red. Can you go back? Section in red there, as well as anything that doesn't reference specific law or rule.
So would the body be okay if we just accept that as a friendly change to her own motion and not go through the whole amending to the amending? Or does someone oppose her taking out those pieces?
Well, I'd also like her to take out any editorializing, any cherry picking, then I would be good. Otherwise, I'd like to.
Earl, is there I think you're right. It just needs to be the law that's referenced there. Is there another area there that has editorializing that I've missed?
The cherry picking, you mean? Yeah, down that PICO sentence.
Yes, those items would be AG official memo removed.
Anything from that?
Board of Education Island Tree would be removed.
Any of that?
The red.
Any of that, that's not in red, but it would still be removed.
The red would be removed.
Red and anything from the AG memo or the one sentence from the Island Tree Schools case. Those would all be removed.
Just the law is what I would like just as, because it's simplified there.
Can we scroll through it one more time, please?
Yes, please, that would be a good.
Law and rule.
Right.
Yes,
So,
law
yeah.
and rule, thank you.
Okay, you can scroll, go ahead. Keep going, keep going. Let me just add that I'm a little bothered by the cherry picking again of board rules. I think that R277, the continual reference to that is really an intimidation piece toward educators. I don't like it. There are other rules that would apply, that could apply that we haven't called out. And so I'm also opposed to that. I don't know whether I'll vote yes or no based on that, but I think continually referencing R277-217 is unnecessary, because we've said that all involved have to follow the law, and that would include R277-217. But calling it out, I think, is an intimidation factor toward educators.
Okay, I'm gonna, we have to get a second. We have to be able to know what we're speaking on. Board Member Earl, I just want to double check with you. What are exactly the pieces that you're taking out of this document so people know what they will be speaking on?
So the language in red that's down below.
Okay.
And the two items, the AG's official memo and the Board of Education Island Tree Union. That Island Trees Union.
Okay. Thank you. So just so the board is aware, that's what we're going to be speaking on at this point. We heard from Member Lear, Member Hansen.
Thank you. Just one other caution when we look at these summaries of law. The law and rule are constantly changing. And anytime you see this published in any kind of legal publication, it would say, this is the law effective as of such and such a date. And it's not, we can't vouch for it anytime in the future, because those could all change. I'm, again, would urge that we exercise caution in doing this if we're not going to commit to keeping this up to date and republishing this every time any one of these rules or laws changes, because the tendency at an LEA level will be to look at this and say, oh, here's the law, even though there may have been some change to it. So if we do adopt this, we need to be very diligent in keeping it up to date and revising our model policy, because this will be a part of the model policy, revising it continuously as the law changes.
Thank you. Board Member Cline.
Okay, so are we voting on whether just to take out the certain parts, or voting for the amendment to include this in the model policy?
The maker of the motion took out the parts as a friendly change to her motion. Do you still want to be the second with those parts taken out? It would be the amount in red and the two pieces of the AG quotes, the two AGO quotes.
I will still second it, but I do want to say there's no cherry picking going on or editorializing when direct quotes are given.
Thank you. Board Member Lear.
My only comment is that is exactly cherry picking when they're taking out sentences of a whole memo. Thank you.
Chair, I do have one more question, and maybe this isn't the right time, but if we're taking out the reference to the AG's official memorandum, I'm curious as to why the official memorandum is only line numbered in the introduction and the conclusion, whereas the Ashley Bill memo is fully line numbered.
I think that was amended last meeting, but can we get some clarification on that? Deputy Superintendent Stallings?
That might actually be a better question directed to Jeff Van Holten.
Director Van Holten?
Formatting. Repeat the question, I apologize.
So the question was, she was saying that, can you repeat, actually, you repeat it. You'll repeat it better than I will. Member
Sure.
Cline.
Well, in the latest draft and the previous one, when it comes to the line numbering for the two memorandums from the AG's office, Ashley Bill's is fully line numbered, whereas the official memorandum, the June 1st memorandum from Attorney General Sean Reyes's office, is only line numbered on the introduction and the conclusion, and not fully line numbered. Both are included in full, but for some reason they have not line numbered the vast majority of the official memorandum, and I'm curious as to why that is.
That's a formatting issue because I only had a PDF of the second letter. So when I copied it into the appendices, the line numbering kind of just went where it went. I did have a Word draft of the first letter, so I was able to copy that in, but it's just a formatting issue. And those line numbers won't stay with the model policy once it passes. Those will be taken out throughout the entire document.
It will all be formatted consistently, is what you're saying, with no line numbers for either.
Correct.
Thank you.
And no line numbers for the rest of the document.
Right.
Seeing no other hands, let's please vote on this amendment as it has been in a friendly way edited or shortened. Board Member Belknap?
No.
Let me read it. Let me read it really quickly. Motion 4 is amended by Member Earl that the board include the definitions and references document as an appendix to the model policy, with the exception of anything included in the document that is in red or that is not exact restatement of Utah code or board rule. Okay, Vice Chair Belknap? No. Board Member Booth?
No.
Member Cannon?
No.
Member Cline?
Yes.
Member Earl?
Yes.
Member Hanson?
No.
Member Chair Huntsman? Chair Huntsman?
He's having technical difficulties, sorry.
Okay, Member Hutchings?
No.
Member Hymas?
No.
Member Lear?
No.
Member Moss?
Yes.
Member Norton?
No.
Member Straight?
No.
That motion does not pass.
And Huntsman's a no. Sorry, I'm having reception problems here.
That motion does not pass with 10 noes. Let's move on to Member Hanson for a motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'll move that I'd like to move forward motions number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from my sheet.
Motion 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Yes, please.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to move that the board would add to line 88, a list of restricted materials shall made available to the public. And in H, a list of restricted materials shall be made available to the public. In 5, and should be representative of the student population. And in line 102V, should be representative of the student population. 6 also, including reason for initial approval of the material, to line 114. And in number 4, again, including reason for initial approval of material. And which other motions, Board Member Hanson? 7?
Yeah, 7 and 8.
Add the public to line 205, and the public again in section L. And in line 236 are restricted while under review. Again, in 5 would read are restricted, a list of materials that are restricted while under review. And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, I don't know if Member Belknap or Straight was first, but.
Board Member Straight.
Either way.
Board Member Straight. Member Hanson, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, if I may. Motions 4, 7, and 8 are all made with the intent of publishing to the public a list of restricted materials, whether materials are being held while they're under review or whether they've been restricted after review, so that parents would be aware that these materials are no longer available in the general library. If I want my kid to access these materials, I need to sign some sort of a form or give them permission. Just again, in the interest of transparency, I think that that list needs to be not just distributed amongst the LEAs, but also made available to the public so that they, if they do want their children to have access to that, can act on that. So again, giving parents the ability to parent. Motions number 5 and 6, or excuse me, number 5, simply says that when we're choosing the people to be on this committee, that the people who are doing that from the LEA should be cognizant of the demographics of their area. And actually the sheet that I have says, and should be representative of the student population, including diverse populations within the school community. I'm not sure how that was changed here, but just that I don't think we can regulate exactly, how many people from each demographic should be on there, but just a reminder that the review committee should not be homogeneous. It should be representative of any diversity that's in the population. And then number 6, this one, I think that it's important for the review committee to have the information from the initial approval of the material when they look at the material and consider the challenge. So this would, I think, give them the idea of why was this material accepted? What kind of review was done? What was the literary value that was seen of it at the time? What need was it trying to fill at the time it was accepted? So I believe that's just an item that probably self-evident that it should be there, but was left off the list. I believe that I've covered all of those, Chair. So thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Earl? Board Member Earl?
Sorry, I'm one screening it today and I'm having going back and forth, so I do apologize. I would like to divide the motion with all of the motions except for 5. I'd like that separated out.
I'll second that.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table to divide the question with a second. And she would like to divide out only, which was the one you wanted to pull out of that list?
5 separate from the other ones, and I don't remember how many the other ones are. But
okay, only pull out number 5. Please vote. Do you have a comment about dividing, Member Cline? Okay, please vote. Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Cannon?
Yes.
Member Cline?
Yes.
Member Earl?
yes.
Member Hanson?
Yes.
Chair Huntsman?
Yes.
Member Hutchings?
Yes.
Member Hymas?
Yes.
Member Lear?
Yes.
Member Moss?
Yes.
Member Norton?
Yes.
Member Straight?
Yes.
We'll go ahead and divide the question. Let's take motion number 5 first, and then we'll do the others after that. I think you've spoken to this already, Member Hanson. Let's take other speakers. Member Moss?
Well, I would propose an amendment that would read the, I guess this is, I guess these are identical, right? So instead of "and should be representative," would read, and should take into consideration the student population, including diverse populations within the school community.
Thank you. There's an amendment as stated. Do we have a second? Amendment to the amendment.
I second it.
Member Booth, we have a second. So we have a new amendment to the amendment on the floor that would read and should be representative of the student population. Wait, I don't think that's the edited one yet.
Move that up on the screen. We can't see it.
A little more.
Yeah.
So it now would read and should be representative. No, it still hasn't been amended. We'll wait for just a second.
And should
believe
take into
it's-
consideration the student population.
So it would read instead and should take into consideration the student population, including diverse populations within the school community. If let's try to keep our comments quickly. Member Cline?
Oh, I didn't really have a comment on this one specifically, although I don't see that it really changes anything
Okay, Member
as
Earl?
far as the content.
Okay, Member Earl?
Yeah, and my concern in general with this idea is that, first of all, I think we're complicating things once again. Now, how do you measure what do we adequately have certain diverse groups in there? And do we, we start limiting, do we look at percents? What are we looking at? Is it representative of this and that? And I think we start complicating things. And then are there legal ramifications if someone writes this in and then they,
Member
they
Earl?
adequately,
I'm sorry. Are you speaking to the amendment or the amendment?
I kind of both, because it's directing this direction to student populations and diverse populations, and instead
Only right now, we're only talking about adding the qualifier, taking into consideration instead of being representative of.
Okay.
Are you for that or against that piece, that change?
I'm currently fine with that.
Okay. Okay, Member Moss.
Chair, if I could save us some time, I'd be happy to make this a friendly amendment unless there's some objection from the body.
Any objection from the body to make this a friendly amendment? Thank goodness. Thank you. Okay, let's, Member Cline. So then now we're just going to be speaking about the language as changed in a friendly way. Now,
Yeah, I would-
Member Cline.
I would speak against this motion. I think we should just leave it the way it was.
Okay.
Because of the complications that it does add in. These individuals on the committee are not voting based on who they are, but whether the material complies with the law or not.
Okay, Member Moss.
I'll just say that the language is meant to avoid the possibility that this would suggest some kind of quota and rather just a consideration broadly of the student population, which I think, addresses some of the concern out there that this is being done for a discriminatory reason. This would, be a reminder to consider everybody, but it wouldn't say, well, you've got X number of people in this group, therefore you need X number on the committee. It would just be something to make sure they're thinking about.
Thank you, Member Earl.
And I think that quota issue is where I think, even though I think this language is softer and just says take into consideration, I still think it strongly suggests that that's what you need to be doing. And I think people that are qualified is who we should have here, not necessarily based on certain characteristics, but people that can look at the content.
Thank you, Member Hanson, and then Member Hymas.
Yeah, just one editorial. I think it should be taking into consideration instead of take into consideration there. And should. Okay, and should take into consideration. That's.
I think it's correct.
Consideration. Sorry, that's fine. But I believe that HB 374 actually has a requirement that this committee be representative of the student population, and maybe staff. I don't know if that's
Deputy Superintendent Stallings, could
Ms.
you
Stallings, that can help us with that.
confirm or
Yes.
deny?
I'd be happy to. It is subsection 3 of 53G dash 10-103. If you, and Kelsey, I wish I could, I'm not sure if there's a chat function. I could just drop that in. But this is what subsection 3 states. An LEA shall include parents who are reflective of the members of the school's community when determining if an instructional material is sensitive. So one way you might do this is say, and should either take into consideration or be reflective of the student population as required. And you could cite to the section of code if you wanted to, so that or you could just copy and paste the language that's in that subsection 3.
Member Hanson, do you want to adjust it, or do you feel like it's reflective enough of the code language?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the code language again right now just to see if there's a way to drop that in, or I think the word reflective is probably a good one. So if we say and should be reflective of, and then looking again, Angie, give me that reference one more time.
It's 53G dash, sorry, and I was just sending it to you.
Okay.
Well, let me just send it.
10-103.
Yep, 10-103, and it's subsection 3.
Okay, looking down at 3, an LEA shall include parents who are, so it just should say members on the committee including parents who are reflective of the members of the school's community. That's the language directly from it, and then we can reference that section of code right there.
I would consider that a friendly as the maker of the amendment, if instead of all this language, we just cite the code.
If I was sitting next to you, Jim, I'd shake hands. So
I think that's the safest course. Just parents who are reflective of a school's community when determining whether an instructional material is sensitive material.
As required by 53.
Yeah, 10G, whatever.
Okay, thank you. Most of the hands went down. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, do you have something to add? Seeing no other hands, please vote. Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Cannon?
Yes.
Member Cline?
No.
Member Earl?
Yes.
Member Hanson?
Yes.
Member Huntsman, or Chair Huntsman?
Yes.
Member Hutchings?
Yes.
Member Hymas? Member Hymas?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Member Lear?
Yes.
Member Moss?
Yes.
Member Norton?
Yes.
Member Straight?
Yes.
That passes unanimously with one no vote for Member Cline. Let's move to the other one in this division of votes, which includes all of the other motions. As stated, do we have anyone who'd like to speak to these? Seeing no hands, please vote. Board Member Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes.
Sorry, Member Cline, did you just stick your hand up?
I did. Sorry, I was trying to get to get my hand up. I just had a quick question on number 6. Do the schools or do the librarians currently have to write up a rationale for all books that they bring into the library? This makes it look like every single book that comes in, they have to document their reason for initially approving it.
If I could respond, Chair, is that
Yes,
I'm referring back to the section 2, selection of materials for library collection. And it has some criteria for the selection. And then it talks about the records that need to be retained there. The intended use of the material is one of those things. So all I'm trying to do here is make sure that that initial review, the documentation for that is included in the review committee's documentation so they can see what was done initially, how the material was brought in. Now, granted, materials already in the library wouldn't have that. So I guess we could say if available here, but going forward, this policy would require that there be an initial selection process.
And is there a form that they fill out? Like a vetting form when they bring new material in?
All I can do is refer you back to the model policy, Natalie, on line 23. That's where it's.
Thank you.
thank you. Seeing no other hands, please vote. Vice Chair Belknap,
Yes.
Member Booth,
Yes.
Member Cannon,
Yes.
Member Cline,
Abstain.
Member Earl,
Yes.
Member Hanson,
Yes.
Member Huntsman,
Yes.
Member Hutchings,
Yes.
Member Hymus,
Yes.
Member Lear,
Yes.
Member Moss,
Yes.
Member Norton,
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
This passes unanimously with one abstention from Member Cline. And let's go back to Member
Vice Chair
Earl.
Davis?
Yes.
Can you tell me where we are in this process again? Are we back to the amended original motion right at this moment?
We are currently on the amended original motion. Oh, yeah, because it's 11:45. So can someone clarify for me if we do or do not have an executive?
We don't have an executive.
Okay, so I can entertain a motion about the original motion, or I can entertain a motion to amend for 15 minutes. Vice Chair Belknap, in your point of order, are you making a motion or are you ready to move on a little bit more?
Well, I was actually going to make a motion to call the question. Where
Okay.
we are.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to call the question. Do we have a second?
Yes, second. Brent Straight.
Okay, I think Member Lear beat you to that, Mr. Straight, if that's okay, Member Straight.
That's great.
Okay, we have, this is not debatable, if I remember right. Is that accurate, Sybil?
You're correct.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Member Belknap? To call the question?
Oh, we're voting, sorry.
Yes, we're voting, sorry.
Yes.
To call the question.
Okay, Member Booth,
Yes.
Member Cannon,
Yes.
Member Cline,
No.
Member Earl,
No.
Member Hanson,
Yes.
Member Chair Huntsman,
Yes.
Member Hutchings,
Yes.
Member Hymus,
No.
Member Lear,
Yes.
Member Moss,
No.
and Member Norton,
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
This motion passes. So there's a motion.
Are you voting on the amended motion?
Now
Yes.
we are voting that the board approves the library material policy merged master draft 1 as amended. Do we have a second?
Second, Norton.
Okay. Speaking towards this, Member Earl,
Why are we seconding it?
It doesn't require a second.
okay,
I remember we just did, you can't do any more motions. We just
Okay.
are going to move it forward without, yep.
so now we're just voting on the whole policy.
As amended.
Okay, And can we take any more speakers or do we just vote?
Have to vote.
Okay. So there's a motion on the table that the board approves the library materials policy merged master draft 1. Please vote. Member Belknap?
Wait, it's merged master draft dated June 30th as amended. It's the second.
Thank you. That there's a motion on the floor that the board approves the library materials model policy merged master draft dated June 30 as amended. Please vote. Member Belknap?
Yes.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Cannon?
Yes.
Member Cline?
No.
Member Earl?
Yes.
Member Hanson?
Yes.
Member Huntsman?
Yes.
Member Hutchings?
Yes.
Member Hymus?
Yes.
Member Lear?
Yes.
Member Moss?
Yes.
Member Norton?
Yes.
Member Straight?
Yes.
That passes unanimously with 1 no vote from Member Klein. So thank you. That was a heavy lift, everybody. Appreciate your hard work and your thoughtful amendments and your respectful discussion today. And we appreciate all those who participated in the process. So I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks
Thank you, Chair.
for participating.
Thanks, Vice Chair Davis.
Thank
Nice
you.
job.
Thank you.
Thank you.